Hello, we are live with Carly Stringer today, and we're talking about Facebook ads and Instagram ads and the changes that happened to iOS. So Carly is going to walk us through the updates and what can you actually do about it. So an approach to help you manage your ads better. Hi, Carly.
Hi.
How are you?
Let me just share shall I get straight into it? I'll share my screen and I'll introduce myself a little bit more.
Absolutely, you can. If you can share your screen, I'll add it. So, as usual, everyone, whoever is going to join us today, they can prepare their questions towards the end. We'll have about 15 minutes to ask any of your questions. If you haven't joined us on StreamYard before, you need to grant access so that when you have a question, your name can appear and we know who's asking the question. And yeah, I guess that's it. And whoever is not joining us live today, so thank you for watching the replay, and don't forget to connect with Carly on social media and also check out her newsletter and website. So Carly, I'm going to add to the stream, and yeah, I'll see you in a bit.
Cool. Right, so hopefully everyone can see that presentation. As Silas said, I'm going to be talking today about iOS 14 and the changing advertising landscape. In particular, the focus for this will be e-commerce businesses, because that's my specialism. But a lot of what I talk about in terms of the implications of iOS 14 are also relevant if you're a service-based business as well. So just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Carly. I'm a paid media specialist. I focus on working with e-commerce brands, and I've been freelancing for about 4 years now. And the best way to connect with me is over on my Instagram @_Carly Stringer. So hopefully I'll see a few of you over there. I do lots of free tips and things over on my Instagram and also in my newsletter, and you'll find all of the links to that over on my Instagram as well. So these are just some of the brands that I've worked with over the last couple of years. As I said, all small independent e-commerce businesses, and specifically focused on helping them with their Facebook and Instagram advertising. So just to delve a little bit more into what we'll be talking about today, specifically, we're going to be looking at some of the most recent changes with Facebook advertising, and specifically iOS 14, but also looking a little bit at the changing landscape as we're shifting in terms of consumer buying behavior and coming out of lockdown as well. So we're going to look at how the e-commerce landscape is changing and how you should be approaching ads in light of this shift. What the iOS 14 update is, we'll just do a bit of a recap on that, and what impact it's having on our advertising. And with those things in mind, how you should be approaching your Facebook advertising. I'm also going to be talking about a metric called Blended ROAS, which is becoming even more important to measure and track in light of some of these changes. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is and why you should be tracking it towards the end of the presentation. So firstly, before we get into iOS 14 and some of the more kind of techie bits that have changed with ads over the last couple of months, I just want to touch on the changing landscape. And again, this is particularly with e-commerce, but I think if you're a service-based business as well, you're potentially seeing some of these shifts as well. So in 2020, we obviously saw a huge shift in online commerce when physical stores were closed. Consumers were forced to shop online. And I think, some of the stats are saying that the e-commerce landscape shifted in acceleration by 5 years in that really short space of time. And there was also demand for different types of products. So we saw businesses that previously had perhaps been doing okay suddenly start to do extremely well within that pandemic. So things like loungewear, homeschooling, distance gifting, all of that sort of stuff. But we also saw some advertisers pulling spend, so things like the travel industry, entertainment industry, restaurants, because they couldn't operate and weren't open. So with an increasing number of people spending time online and some of the bigger advertisers pulling out their spend, this resulted in some of the cheapest costs we've seen, and therefore some of the best results ever for small businesses. So 2020 was a very, very different year from anything we have ever seen before. Now we're into 2021, we're seeing yet another shift, particularly over the last couple of months within the UK. We do still expect e-commerce to grow, but at a much slower rate than what we saw it grow last year. People have now become much more used to shopping online, so we will see that trend continue. Again, we're starting to see a shift in type of products that consumers want and need. So consumers are now turning their attention towards eating out, traveling, socializing. So along with that, there's a shift in the sorts of products that they're looking to buy. We're also seeing costs on Facebook rebounding to those pre-pandemic highs, and in some cases even higher than that. And this is just because industries that haven't advertised in the last year are going all in to recoup any losses. We're also seeing competitors in product categories that we traditionally haven't seen in demand online, because now a lot more of them use that opportunity in 2020 to get themselves online, and now they're continuing to spend online. And as well, with fewer people spending time online because we're spending more time outdoors, seeing friends and family, etc., as things start to open up again, that competition for advertising space and getting in front of your consumers is a lot fiercer. So things are more expensive, and it's generally a lot more competitive and a lot tougher than last year. Coupled with that, Apple have made it even tougher for us this year with their privacy updates, which they've launched, and we'll go into that a little bit later, which is affecting not just Facebook and Instagram, but other online platforms as well. And as I said, we'll talk a little bit more about the impact that's had and what you should be doing with that in mind a little bit later in the presentation. I also expect there's going to be a further shift to social commerce later in the year with the launch of Facebook Checkout in the UK. And I can chat to Lenka about doing a specific presentation on this as and when this launches. It's something that's been in testing in the US for a while. It's not something that we've seen roll out, at least not to the masses in the UK yet. What this will mean is that people will be able to check out directly on Facebook and Instagram without even visiting your website. There's both benefits and potential negatives to that, and that's something that we can talk about when the time comes, when that launches. But that is just something to keep in mind, that is going to cause yet another shift in how people buy online and another sort of step forward in social commerce. That all said, although it is a lot tougher this year, a lot more competitive, a lot of people started to buy online last year that potentially wouldn't have bought online, or at least as readily online before. And of the 75% of consumers who say they tried different online brands during the pandemic, 60% expect to continue to integrate those into their post-COVID lives. So there's certainly still a huge opportunity. As I said, we still expect social commerce to grow this year, and we have a broader number of consumers that we can reach because people are becoming more used to online shopping, and that has been accelerated due to the pandemic. So the opportunity is definitely still there. So that's just talking a little bit about kind of this shift, and that's definitely worth bearing in mind, particularly if you're seeing things and you're thinking, oh, you know, last year I had a really great year and things are slowing down. That's completely normal. It's something we are seeing across the board. So that is just something to bear in mind. As I said, on top of those shifts in consumer behaviour, we're also seeing changes come into play on the Facebook platform due to privacy updates that have been introduced by Apple. So we'll talk about those now and what impact they're having. So when Apple launched its most recent update on iPhone in terms of its iOS platform, it enforces an update. And the one that we're on now is iOS 14 point something. I can't quite remember what version we're on right now. But in April, as that ticked over, Apple began to require that all apps in the App Store show a tracking permission prompt, which is known as the App Tracking Transparency, or the ATT prompt. Then it looks a little bit like the one that you see on the right, which is a mock-up. They're all slightly different for different apps because the developers can add in their own wording. This is just a bit of a mock-up for what the Facebook one might have looked like. And some of you, if you're on an iPhone, you potentially would have seen this already. This won't affect anyone that's on an Android device. It's just specifically on an iPhone. But if you've updated to the most recent operating system, you would have seen each app ask you for permission to track your activity around the internet. Now, what happens is that Apple is going to, or has started to prohibit certain data collection and sharing unless people opt into tracking when these prompts are shown. So essentially what that means is previously, had I gone on to an ad and then bought something via an ad from my iPhone, Facebook would have had visibility of that. I would have seen that purchase on the dashboard. I would have seen it in my Shopify store, and it would have all been tracked. Now, if I opt out of that tracking, I potentially will still be served the ad, and I'll still go through and make the purchase, and you'll still see that purchase in the Shopify store. But if I haven't opted into that tracking, Facebook can't track that data, and therefore you will not see that purchase appear on your Facebook advertising dashboard. So this is not just affecting Facebook, but it's affecting any app that track people's activity around the internet to inform their advertising or personalization services. So things like TikTok, Pinterest, it's going to have some level of impact across all of those different platforms. So specifically, how has this affected Facebook advertising? We've already seen a lot of this come into play and starting to affect our ads over the last The first thing that's changed is that the default optimization and attribution window has changed from a 28-day click, 1-day view to a 7-day click. And we also still have a 7-day click, 1-day view still available. Now, what that means, I'll try and explain it as simply as possible, is previously last year and before the Apple prompt came out, if someone clicked on an ad, say I clicked on an ad for a jumper, I went in and had a look and I thought, oh, I really like that. But you know what? I'm going to wait until I get paid in 15 days time. Then I remember and I go back and I buy that in 15 days time. Previously, Facebook would have still attributed that sale to the ad because it's happened within that 28-day period. Now it doesn't have that visibility that far out. So if I went and bought that jumper 15 days after clicking on an ad, it wouldn't log on the dashboard. You would still see it obviously in your store, the purchase has still been made, but Facebook would not have visibility of that data. So it doesn't have visibility of data anything beyond 7 days. So we've lost quite a significant amount of data there for anyone making purchases after 7 days of clicking on an ad. Now, for products that have got a lower average order value or that are quite an instant purchase, this probably hasn't made a whole lot of difference. But if you have a higher value product, then potentially you are losing sight of quite a lot of those conversions. So things like furniture, bigger value items or things that take a lot more consideration to purchase. So even potentially things like baby products where people are kind of trying to research them and sort of getting all of their ideas together a while before they buy, you potentially would have seen some of that data loss. It's also affecting some of our custom and lookalike audiences. So custom audiences on Facebook are audiences that you create from your existing customer or audience base. So things like Instagram engagers, Facebook engagers, website visitors, people who have added to cart, people who have purchased. And lookalike audiences are audiences that we create based off of those custom audiences. So I might, for example, tell Facebook, create a lookalike audience of people that have purchased my product and tell Facebook to go and find me more people that look like those purchasers. I might create a lookalike of Instagram engagers, which is telling Facebook, go and find more people that look like people who have engaged with me on Instagram. Now, where people are opting out of tracking, Facebook is losing some of the data for these audiences. So, for example, previously I might have had a load of purchasers and I could create a really good audience of purchasers. But now if a lot of my purchasers are opting out of tracking, Facebook won't be able to include those people in that audience. And therefore it means that when it's creating a lookalike audience, it has less data to base that lookalike off of. So potentially some of our lookalikes, and we are seeing this, particularly lookalikes that are based off of website data, are decreasing in effectiveness. And our custom audiences, which we use for retargeting, are getting smaller and again, potentially in some instances, less effective. The other thing that we're potentially seeing is reporting being delayed. It's not something I'm necessarily seeing in all accounts, but I'm definitely hearing some advertisers saying that their reporting is delayed and it's allowing for less real-time optimization. So whereas people would have been able to go in and look at their dashboard in real time, sometimes now we're having to wait a little bit longer to make those optimizations just to make sure that we have a full picture of data. The other big shift is that conversions are now attributed on the day they take place versus the day the customer saw the ad. So previously, say I saw an ad for a jumper on the Monday and I bought that jumper on the Wednesday, you would see that sale in your Shopify or whatever store you're running on the Wednesday. You would see that sale on the Wednesday, but in the ads platform, it would have attributed to the Monday. Now it's going to attribute to the same day the conversion takes place. So if I see the ad on a Monday, buy the jumper on a Wednesday, you'll see the sale on the Wednesday, and it will report on the ads dashboard on the Wednesday. So it's probably not a huge shift that's really making much difference, I don't think, but it's just a shift to be aware of, that there is that change in how conversions are reported. We're also seeing that some results may be incomplete or estimated. So again, if anyone has opted out of tracking, you're not going to see their data. If you're using certain attribution windows, you can see it if you're using a one-day click attribution. You will see purchase events from people who have opted out, but then you're not going to see any data for conversions that happen after one day. So that's not necessarily a setting that I would recommend unless you have a really low average order value and an instant purchase. You'll also potentially have seen, if you're advertising, there's no longer any support for conversion data breakdowns, which is really affecting our visibility of what is working. Previously, I could see if I had a campaign running, I could break down that data and see, okay, what proportion of people that have purchased from that campaign are male versus female, or what age group do they fall in? I can no longer see that data. We can see it for some of the on-platform metrics, such as click-through rates, but we can no longer get conversion data for some of those breakdowns. Similarly, I can no longer see, for example, how many people have purchased after seeing an ad on Facebook versus Instagram. So if we want to see that sort of data, we're having to manually kind of separate our campaigns to give us that data. For some clients, this isn't such an issue, but for others, particularly if you're new to advertising and you want to get an idea of that data to help inform what your customer persona looks like, that is causing a bit of an issue, and it's not allowing us to be as specific in our optimizations in terms of narrowing age ranges and sort of the platforms that we might want to show our advertising on. So those are some of the key things that have been affected since the iOS 14 update rolled out. And we're starting to see the significance of these effects increase over time. So initially, we didn't see too much of an impact because not many people had opted out of tracking. Now, as we're coming further out from that update, like I said, the update rolled out in mid-April sometime. As we're getting further out from that, more and more people are seeing the prompts and therefore having the opportunity to opt out, and we're starting to see a greater impact of that on our advertising. So if you haven't already and you are advertising, there are some essential steps you should have taken already, but if you haven't, then you need to go away, and I would recommend doing them as soon as possible, just to make sure that your account is getting as much data as possible, so that your ads can optimize as effectively as possible in light of some of this data loss. The first one is in your Facebook Business Manager, verifying your domain. This ensures that you're official in the eyes of Facebook. And as far as we can tell, it's necessary for you to perform certain operations, and your ads may stop if you don't do this. I don't think this is as much of an issue as we first thought if you have just got a single domain and you're a small business, but regardless, I would do it anyway. I will share this presentation with the guys at Cambridge Social Media so that you can have access to this, so that you can see some of these screenshots in a bit more detail, because I appreciate they're quite small and detailed. But to verify your domain, you need to go into your business settings in Facebook Ads Manager, navigate to brand safety and domains. You then need to look at the meta tag verification tag and copy this code. If you're on Shopify, you can then go into your online store and themes and edit the code. And then you want to place the piece of code that you copied into the what's called theme.liquid. Post it into the head section. So you can see here, I've just pasted it just underneath where I've got that head tag. Save that, and then you can click verify here on the green button, and you should see a little green dot next to your domain to say that it has been verified. I also have a blog post on my website with all these screenshots and walking through the different steps you need to take. So I'll also share that with the guys at Cambridge Social Media, so that if you haven't gone through these steps and you need to, you can use that blog post and it will walk you through exactly what you need to do. The second one you need to do is making sure you're implementing what's called the conversion API. So again, trying to simplify this, previously when we've been tracking purchases and conversions on our website, we've used what's called the Facebook Pixel, which is a piece of code placed on your website that can track user activity. In order to try and get further data for things that maybe the Pixel doesn't quite track correctly, we've now got what's called the Conversions API, and that uses what's called server-side data and sends that to Facebook. So, for example, when someone makes a purchase on your website and they input things like their email address, their name, that data is sent directly from your store server to Facebook. So it's slightly different to how the Pixel tracks. So really now you want to have both the Pixel and the Conversions API running so that you can try and maximize the amount of conversions that Facebook is able to see. On Shopify, this is really easy. You just need to make sure that you've got the new Facebook channel app, and then you'll sign in. It'll walk you through all the steps for signing in, and then you need to make sure that in the settings under data, you have this set to maximum. For something like if you're on WordPress and WooCommerce, again, it's fairly straightforward with the Facebook WooCommerce integration. There's a little button, I think, where you can switch on See API. So you'll just have to have a look depending on what platform you're using. But I know the majority of store owners at the moment are on Shopify. So if you add the Facebook channel and walk through the steps and in those settings, set data sharing to maximum, that'll automatically turn on the See API. The third thing you want to do is turn on what's called auto advanced matching. This again is back in your business manager account. If you go into events manager, it's like this little octopus looking symbol. And then if you find your Pixel that's running and then go into the settings and scroll down, this is about halfway down the page, there's a section called advanced matching. Even if this is clicked to on, you want to expand the options and make sure all of them are clicked onto on, just to make sure, again, that Facebook is collecting the maximum amount of data possible, and it can try and make sure that it's matching up those conversions and that you're getting as much visibility on Facebook as you can. So that's another thing that you want to make sure is turned on. I would also recommend, even if you think you have done this, double checking it, because I found that Facebook has a bit of a tendency to switch them off when you've already switched them on. So it's something that I'm checking quite regularly for my clients, just to make sure that they stay switched on. The final step to take is setting what's called your priority events. Again, in Events Manager, the same section, you'll see this little tab called Aggregated Events Measurement, and it's got a little new purple button by it. You need to click on that. Click configure your events, and then you need to prioritize your events by the order that you want them, that is the most priority for your business. So if you're an e-commerce business, the most priority event that you'll want Facebook to show is your purchase event, followed by initiate checkout, add to cart, and then view content. And this just means that if you are running a one-day view optimization, or one-day click optimization, and you are able to get some data from opt-outs, it will show you the data for the highest priority event. So I don't think for most of you this is going to be completely essential, but again, it's something that I would just go through and complete to make sure that you have got all of the settings exactly as Facebook advise. Again, all of this is step-by-step instructions in my blog post, because I appreciate it's quite a lot to take in just on a single call like this, and it's much easier to walk through as you're going through it in your own business manager. So that's some of the more techie side of things, but in light of everything that's happened, what does this mean for our ad strategy, and what changes, if anything, should we be making? So the biggest thing to understand is what iOS 14 and the e-commerce shifts mean for your business specifically. So you may need to revise your targets. So for example, last year, lots of people were reporting extremely high numbers for their return on ad spend, or ROAS. And actually those numbers probably aren't realistic or achievable in an average year. So what you need to work out is, what return on ad spend do you need to be profitable for your business? And you can work that out by looking at what your kind of average order value is, and then what your costs are associated with that order value, and therefore how much you can pay for a conversion on something like Facebook. As I mentioned previously in the presentation, I wouldn't compare this year with last in terms of your day-to-day success on Facebook, because it will look very different. This time last year, we were still in that midst of that first lockdown, just starting to ease out of it, and things were looking very, very different. The other thing that you need to start looking at and tracking, if you're not already, is called your blended ROAS. And I've got a slide on this when I go into it in a little bit more detail, because this looks at the overall picture of the success of your store and not just what's happening specifically in Facebook. As I said before, success last year was easier than this year from an advertising perspective. So it's even more important than ever that you give yourself the best chance with a strong website that's converting, great creative and good copy. And from a copy perspective, it's really important to think about how your customers' moods, desires and preferences have changed or will be changing over the coming months. And how can you meet those needs this new phase of life? And don't underestimate just the difference to results that a simple change in copy or creative can have. I've got an example. One ad account that I was running ads for wasn't doing very well. We were trying to sell, it's a clothing store, and we were really trying to push t-shirts as we moved into kind of the spring and slightly warmer weather, and it just was not doing as well as previous years. So we took a step back and had to think about where our customers were right now. And actually previously t-shirts and vests have done quite well because people are thinking about their holiday wardrobes and going abroad. So we thought, okay, where are people at this year? People are thinking about staycations. They're thinking about going on holiday in the UK. Weather can still be really changeable. So we actually put some of the warmer clothing back in. So their best-selling hoodie and a couple of sweatshirts. And we paired that with a message about summer staycations, going to festivals, going camping, and the weather being changeable, and that you still need to prepare for eventualities. And that ad did really, really well and completely helped turn the ad account around just from that simple change in copy and creative, because we met the customers' needs where they were now and with what they're thinking and planning on doing over the next couple of months. So that's just one example of how really drilling into your copy and creative and meeting your customers' needs can help improve your results. And I always say that your creative and your copy is your biggest lever for changing your return on ad spend. You can fiddle and faff with audiences and different settings within your ad account for sure. But if your copy and creative isn't meeting the mark, then you won't have any success in improving that ROAS. And that mantra still stays the same now, even post iOS 14. It's all about your copy and your creative is the most important thing to be spending your time on. So test some more. Test different products, images and messaging. When it comes to images, you want to be making sure you're testing brand images as well as customer images and influencer images. If you've got them, take all of your collateral and don't leave kind of any stone unturned in terms of what you are testing. As well as your customer kind of moods, desires and preferences changing, you might also find that your customer base has actually shifted from last year. So people were buying in the pandemic last year that have never kind of bought online before. So now you might have new audiences in the mix, but you also might have people that bought last year that now are shifting more back to bricks and mortar stores. So it's really important, again, that you, as well as your copy, your creative, that you're testing all of those different audiences as well to see what's working right now. And if an audience has worked for you before, but you haven't tested it in a while, then retest it, test audiences that you haven't tested before. We're also finding that large, broad audiences are working better. The reason being that it's giving Facebook more data to work with. And in light of losing some of that data, you know, we don't want to constrain Facebook by giving it really small, super niche audiences. So definitely try bigger, broader audiences if you haven't already. For some of the accounts that I'm working on, just a simple broad audience narrowed only by gender and age are some of my best audiences, despite the fact that they're massive. Just giving Facebook the opportunity to go and find the right person is working really, really well. And remembering that in light of some of the data loss, some of your lookalike audiences, the performance might decline. So if you've been relying heavily on lookalikes for things like lookalikes of purchasers or lookalikes of website visitors, and you're finding that the performance of those is declining, try basing your lookalikes off of different audiences that may have seen less data loss. So for example, lookalikes of Instagram engagers, lookalikes of Facebook engagers, lookalikes of Klaviyo or email list audiences can still be really successful. So think about where you can go with the audiences that you're using for your lookalikes, and don't just rely on those website-based audiences. I will say, though, that you've got to also think beyond Facebook. As acquisition costs rise and advertising costs rise on Facebook, getting those new customers in the door is becoming more expensive. So don't ignore the retention of customers that you gained last year or that you've gained previously, and really try and eke out as much lifetime value out of those customers as you can, trying to get them to come back and purchase again, getting them to recommend you to friends and family. One really great way of doing this is through your email marketing. So really making sure that's working hard for you. So if email marketing is something you've sort of neglected, maybe you're not actively building your list, maybe it was a month or two ago since you last emailed your list, really think about getting back on top of that. So you should be sending abandoned cart emails. You should be sending emails to entice customers who haven't shopped in a while back to store. What offers? How can you position your products? Again, think about maybe you can sort of centric collection or something like that and advertise that to your email marketing. Are there special offers you can do for people's birthdays? There's lots and lots of reasons that you'll have to legitimately email your customers. And the harder that you can make your email list work, that will help your store sales, your retention costs, and therefore your lifetime value of your customer. And with your ad targeting as well, don't neglect your warm audiences within your advertising. So you can advertise to your lifetime customer list. You can advertise to people who have engaged with you on Facebook and Instagram in the last year. You can advertise to your website visitors from the last 6 months. You can advertise to past purchasers. So again, all of those warm audiences, how can you get them to come back and either make that first purchase or purchase again? So things like cross-selling products, showing off new launches, showing them special offers. There's lots of way that you can use advertising on Facebook and Instagram, not only to get new customers through the door, but to make sure that you're nurturing those warm audiences as well. One thing that I would say, although the last sort of month and the next coming months, I expect will be challenging, I wouldn't advise completely cutting Facebook from your advertising strategy if you are already advertising on Facebook. And there's several reasons for this. Firstly, you'll reset all learnings. If you turn off your ads for more than 7 days, you're going to lose all of that optimization that you had. And then if you try and come back in at sort of Black Friday week to make the most of that, you'll find it very, very difficult. Facebook and Instagram will be driving more sales than it appears. And that's where your blended ROAS comes in. And I will talk about that in a minute. Turning off Facebook ads will likely decrease your total revenue and slow and halt your growth. So often that's not something that you want to happen. You don't kind of want to go backwards. And now, particularly from July onwards, is a really important time to begin to build your audiences and build up those warm audiences ahead of Q4, when things are likely to get even more expensive. So even though it's quite expensive now, you want to make the opportunity to be building those warm audiences and advertising to people, getting them looking at your store, so that when you kind of come in with your Christmas offers, that you've already got a lot of people within that funnel, and that you can then go back and advertise to your warm audiences and make the most of those, rather than having to pay through the roof to get in front of cold audiences at the most expensive time of year. Also, I'd say to look at the bigger picture, not a small window of time. So I've heard a lot of people say, oh, in the last 7 days, my ads have really not worked. But actually, when you look over kind of what's happened across the course of the year so far, the picture looks a lot better. So you are going to have these ups and downs, but it's really important to look at the bigger picture and a bigger time frame. Similarly, when you're looking at your ad results specifically, don't just look at a couple of days. It's really easy for a couple of days to kind of look really bad. You want to be looking at bigger windows of time, so 7 to 14 day time points, before really making any rash decisions. If you are finding things really tough at the moment on Facebook and Instagram, by all means, you might want to decrease spend to help get you through kind of this rougher patch, and can potentially consider diversifying some spend to other channels, such as Google Ads, if that's something you haven't tried before. But I would not cut spend completely. Now, I've talked a lot about blended ROAS as well in the last few slides, so just wanted to explain what that is and why you should be having a look at that. So we know at the moment that the Facebook dashboard is under reporting, so your ROAS might look pretty bad within Facebook. But remember, it can't report data at the moment, or since iOS 14 for those who have opted out of tracking. And it can't report data for those who make a purchase more than 7 days after seeing an ad if you're using the default optimization. So you're getting a lot of sales in your store that are likely to have been driven by Facebook and Instagram advertising, but Facebook just isn't reporting those. So it is making it a lot more challenging to see how effective Facebook is at driving some of those sales. So this is where blended ROAS comes in, and why you should be using that as your guiding star as to how effective your digital marketing activity is. So I would be keeping track of your blended ROAS and seeing how that correlates with your on-platform ROAS, so what Facebook is reporting in the dashboard, and establishing separate targets for each, so you know exactly what you're aiming for in terms of your overall blended and your Facebook. So how you calculate those, your Facebook return on ad spend is looking at your total Facebook conversion value, so what the sales have been worth on Facebook, divided by your Facebook ad spend. Your blended ROAS is looking at your total store sales, so within Shopify, what the total sales are, total spend across all platforms. Now, if it's just Facebook that you're advertising on, that will just be your Facebook spend. If you're advertising on Facebook and Google, then it will be the total spend across the two. What you'll be able to then see is, okay, well, if I'm increasing my Facebook spend, how does that affect my blended ROAS? Because you might find that you increase Facebook spend, or even if you keep it the same, but your results seem to dip, but actually your blended ROAS stays stable or even increases, you know Facebook is working a lot better than actually what it's reporting in store, particularly if your other channels are staying consistent, if you are advertising elsewhere. So keeping an eye on both is going to be really important moving forward to make decisions around scaling, whether you want to put more money in, whether the whole sort of digital marketing approach that you're taking is working together. I would then use your Facebook metrics, your return on ad spend, as well as some of the softer metrics like your click-through rates, to make more detailed decisions about what audiences and what ads are specifically most likely to be driving the success of your account. So just having a look at some of the key takeaways from today. The e-commerce and ad landscape is changing. It has already started to change this year, and we'll certainly see it change over the next couple of months and potentially even right into winter. So if we go back into further lockdowns, things like that, consumer buying behavior is going to continue to shift. So you need to keep adjusting your strategy depending on what is happening externally. And in line with that change, competition for online ad space will change as well. We've also seen the Apple privacy updates come into play, and over the sort of coming months, we'll start to see the knock-on effect of those. I do expect that Facebook will kind of retaliate and come back with workarounds. We're already starting to see some of those workarounds come into play. So come the end of the year, I do expect that situation to look a lot better in terms of our data visibility. But until then, we're going to have to rely more heavily on metrics such as blended ROAS. It's essential to take the steps outlined that I've mentioned with regards to iOS 14 in terms of those settings within your account. They are essential and not just a nice to have, just to make sure that you can maximize the data visibility that you do have. I will share the blog post with the guys at Cambridge Social Media so that you can look at that and work through those in your own time if you haven't made some of those changes already. And potentially you will need to reassess your ad strategy in light of those couple of changes. Specifically thinking about your ad creative and messaging and just making sure it's meeting your customers where they are right now. Thinking about testing different audiences, going back to ones that you've tried before that maybe you haven't tried in a while, as well as testing new audiences, and really revisiting and thinking about your targets and taking into consideration that blended ROAS. But Facebook aside, don't ignore customer retention or your email marketing. So it's not just about chasing new customers and using advertising for that. Use your advertising to make inroads with those existing customer bases and people who already engage with your business, and think about how as well you can use your email marketing and your organic social media as well, because those are your two kind of free platforms, and particularly your email marketing, because that is the data that you own. And if, you know, Facebook and Instagram went down tomorrow, your email list is what you're left with. So you need to make sure, regardless of that, is working really hard for you. So if it's something you've been neglecting, now is the time to make sure that you are making the most of your email marketing as well. I will, after this, be able to answer any questions. I know some people had questions in advance about budgets and things, so I'm happy to take questions after this. I did just want to say that I am shortly going to be launching a membership for e-commerce store owners who are looking to get help with their Facebook advertising. I know it's a really challenging time at the moment. I'm getting lots of questions from people that kind of need help and support. So I decided to put together a membership, which is a place where I can provide lots of bite-sized video tutorials, live Q&As, troubleshooting clinics, the latest updates and things to a group of members via a Facebook group and also a private membership platform. So I'm going to be launching that specifically to a wait list as a soft launch in July. If that sounds like it might be of interest to you, then you can find out a bit more information and join the wait list over on my website at carlystringer.com. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm happy to take any questions related to that presentation, or like I said, I know some people had some questions in advance about budgets.
Yes, that was a lot of information. I was watching and I'm like, oh my gosh, I know what I have to do. It's just a matter of like actually doing it, because no matter how much you see tutorials, like once you start doing it on Facebook, it's like, wait, that doesn't look the same. Where is that word? Where is that link? And so on. So I'm currently...
I would say the best way is just to get stuck in. Don't be afraid. I think people are so afraid of getting things wrong, and you can't really get things wrong. And what works for one, I run multiple accounts, and actually I'm the same person running things, but they all work differently. And what works in one account, I might test in another and it doesn't work. So it can be very, very different. What works for one account doesn't work for another. You've really got to think about your particular business, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. The greatest success from Facebook advertising, or I think any digital marketing, comes from just putting something out there, testing it, looking at it and thinking, okay, well, what about that worked well? What didn't work well? And do more of what's working and less of what's not. And gradually you'll kind of iterate and find your little successes. But you're not going to do that unless you kind of get started and just start testing things.
Yeah. I think what's happening, please, meanwhile, if you have any questions, please post them so we can start with the questions. But I'm just gonna say this, is that I think what's happening is that for small business owners, they're probably dealing with small budgets that they want to make as lucrative as possible and have the ROI as high as possible. So when we hear words like, yeah, Facebook is about testing, see what works, what doesn't work, so it kind of scares us a bit. But my budget is not that big. So with testing, you're losing some of your budgets, right?
Yeah. And what I would do in that instance is consolidate things as much as possible. So if you've got a really small budget, you're not going to be able to test everything at one time. So I would start by testing your creative, your images and your copy, and not worry too much about having lots of different audiences. So you might just have one or two audiences, which, like I said, are probably going to be quite big, broad audiences. Start to get a feel of what creative is working. When you've got an idea of what creative is working, then you can put some budget towards testing different audiences. A smaller budget doesn't mean that you can't have successes on Facebook, but it just means that you have to test things in a more kind of linear fashion rather than being able to test everything at once.
When you say about, more broad audience, and you mentioned something in the Chinese, like you're choosing only age and gender. So do you mean that when we're setting the ads and choosing interest of audience, we don't need to choose, for example, if I'm a health clinic, I don't need to choose people who are interested in health and yoga and things like that? Do I opt out of these interests just to make my audience as broad as possible?
Yeah, and it depends on your business. So if your business is quite niche, then then broad audiences might not work for you. Or if you're a very new business and your pixel doesn't have a lot of data, then you might need to go down that interest route first. But if I'm selling something like women's t-shirts and jumpers, then it's quite broad appeal. Even if, if the price point is fairly kind of average and I'm not trying to sell a Chanel handbag that's a very specific audience, then you can go quite broad with your audience and let Facebook find the right people for you, because even with this data loss, Facebook still knows a hell of a lot more about your customers than you probably have sight of. So for many businesses, a big broad audience can work really, really well. For some it can't if you're very super niche, but for a lot of people it does. And they're some of my best audiences for my clients if I can pair it with the right copy and creative.
Yeah. The other point, thank you. So the other point about why we're also maybe afraid of testing is the other kind of individuals. So someone like me who is, working with clients, I'm supposed to be helping them with some of their, evergreen content, with boosting it with a bit of budget. Is that they also work with a small budget, but the thing is, like, they're seeking my help. So when they hear this word testing, like, oh, why didn't this work? And like, where's the results we were expecting? So it's a bit of questioning that you need to, when you understand what's happening with Facebook, and like, yes, this is about testing, you become a bit more confident about it. But when you think like, yes, I'm supposed to be an expert and I'm supposed to be delivering results, then it kind of scares you off.
No, when even people that have been advertising since day one that Facebook had advertising, and like I said, it's different for every client. So just because something works for one doesn't mean it works for another. And sometimes I've been really surprised that I put a piece of creative out there that I think is great and should do really well, and then I'll test something out of the box thinking, well, I don't think this will do well, but I'm going to test it and it does really well. So don't make any assumptions, test everything. And you are going to have to go through a period of testing. So if you are a brand new account and you're just getting started with advertising, then you are going to have to, give it a couple of months before necessarily hitting those targets. It is a bit of an investment up front. So be prepared for that. And even with accounts that I've been running for several years, I'm still constantly in a flux of testing things, because that business's products will change. They'll launch new products, their customer base shifts, and over time, consumer buying behavior shifts. So I'm constantly, even though I've got things in the account working, I don't just sit back and say, oh, I've got stuff working, I'll leave it. I know at some point that will stop working. So I want to be testing, okay, what's the next thing that's going to work? So even with established accounts, you should never stop that testing process.
No, fair enough. Thank you. Okay, so we'll take some questions. The first one from Diana. A lot of small business clients have small audiences, and we find our ad sets are in learning phases or limited learning phases. Do you have any suggestion to get out of that? Again, like, we don't want to be testing all the time and learning. I think this is her question.
This can be really hard. That learning phase can be really hard for small businesses to get out of with a small budget. Even some of my clients that have got bigger budgets, it can be really challenging to get out of that learning phase. I would say don't worry about it too much. It can mean that Facebook is a little bit more unstable in that learning phase, but I've got a lot of accounts that are in learning phase and still get good results. The one thing that you can do is not spread your budget too thin. So to get out of that learning phase, Facebook likes 50 purchases per audience per week, which is a lot for some small businesses, and some small businesses will not reach that point. But to get closer to that point, then you need to start consolidating your accounts. So fewer audiences, and try and put as much spend into each audience as you can. So if you've only got, £20 a day to advertise, you don't want to have 5 different audiences. I would have a maximum of 2 so that you've got a decent amount of budget for each audience. So it's just about not spreading your budget too thinly, but similarly, sometimes you might not be able to get out of that learning phase. So I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Right, I was going to sneeze there, but I didn't come out. Okay, so we have another question. I struggle at the moment when I post into my private group that it changes the post to a sales post. Can't seem to switch it off. Any expert? I
don't think that's something I can particularly help with groups. Maybe hopefully someone else in the comments can help with that.
Hopefully. It's not a question, but it was a comment from James about losing some of the conversion information.
Yeah, this is really frustrating, and particularly I think for some businesses it was really important to be able to see where that spend is going. What you can do, James, is you can separate things out. So if it's really important for you to see, for example, how males are performing versus females, then create specific audiences and just have men in one, women in another, and run them alongside each other. And then you will be able to see that breakdown, because you'll be manually forcing it. So if that data is really important to you, you can do that. That requires a bit more budget. You can still see some of the on-platform metrics in those breakdowns, so things like click-through rates, which can still give you enough information to start to make optimization decisions. But yeah, unfortunately, this is a big one that's a real sort of pain in the bum.
Yeah. Okay, another one from Diana. Have you noticed that a lot of small, medium-sized businesses are experiencing a lack of conversion because of the iOS 14 update? Some of my struggling with that. One pivot we've decided to make is focus more on awareness campaigns and then retargeting. Do you have any other tactics?
Yeah, and I think this is where your blended ROAS comes in as well, to make sure that those lack of conversions that you're seeing, to get a picture, is that lack of conversions just because of a lack of data on Facebook? And actually, when you look at the overall store picture, the store is still doing okay, and therefore Facebook is still driving those conversions, you just can't see them. Or is it a case that actually your whole store performance has gone down, which is potentially a result of iOS 14 if you're relying heavily on Facebook ads, potentially a result of everything externally going on with coming out of lockdown and sort of changing consumer buying behavior. I think you're doing the right thing in terms of, I've always got campaigns running that are more, I don't use awareness campaigns, but I would use a conversion campaign to a cold audience, and then I would retarget them. The other things that you can be doing is just testing different audiences, as I said, and seeing whether different audiences are working for you better right now than perhaps have done it in the past. Yeah, I'm outside of that you can be doing apart from that massive testing piece, because what is working right now isn't necessarily what worked a couple of months ago. And if you're working with clients and they are asking those kind of hard questions, blended ROAS can be really helpful in kind of explaining some of that and sort of directing them to articles about the loss of data, because often it is just that loss that you're seeing in Facebook. Making sure that you've got all of those changes implemented as well in terms of the CAPI and some of those techie bits that I went through are really important too, because if you don't have those in place, then you'll be losing even more data than is really necessary. So that will hopefully help bolster some of that as well if you haven't got those things in place.
Oh, wow. I don't envy anyone who is trying to do ads, because I am as well. Okay, we do have other questions actually that were submitted in the community that you probably asked some of them, but I can see a question that seems a bit different. So the question is, once your budget is over and you can't pay more, does the platform penalize your content forever? I have seen great difference after I stopped paying compared to the reach we used to have before using Facebook Business Manager to do ads.
So this question is probably twofold. So I would say getting organic reach on Facebook now is really, really challenging. I'd say to have success, particularly if you're trying to sell products, to have success on Facebook, you need to be advertising. I think if your audience is on Instagram, you can have more success on Instagram organically. In terms of Facebook penalizing you, I don't think it penalizes you for not advertising. I think it just is hard to get organic traction on Facebook. It will penalize you to some extent in platform. If you've, say, been advertising and you've spent a budget of £100 and then you switch that campaign off, and then in a couple of months you come back and want to switch that campaign back on again, it starts the whole learning process again, which is one reason why I've said in my presentation I wouldn't advise stopping your spend. What you really want to try and do is keep a consistent spend and be spending daily so that Facebook can continually get those learnings. If you switch a campaign off for more than 7 days, when you switch it back on, Facebook starts the whole learning process again, which can affect your results that you're getting. So I would say, if you can, you want to be using daily budgets when you're advertising, and try not to switch stuff off and on if you can avoid it.
Interesting. We do have another question, kind of continuous to that, is, do you have suggested daily budget and ad duration?
So daily budget, I usually go based on how many audiences you're running. So at the top of funnel, I tend to earmark at minimum £10 per audience per day. So if you've got £20 to spend on your cold audiences, don't have any more than 2 audiences, because you'll be spreading your budget too thinly. Overall, for my advertising budget, in terms of different funnel stages, top of funnel, which is cold audiences, middle of funnel, your warmer audiences, and bottom of funnel is your retargeting people who have actively been looking at products, I try and start with around about 70 to 80% at that top of funnel. So most of your budget should be going towards cold audiences and trying to get new traffic to your website. And then 20 to 30% at that middle and bottom of funnel and retargeting. That changes a little bit on an account basis and sort of price of product and things, but that's roughly how I benchmark that. For e-commerce, you will struggle to have great success if you haven't got £1,000 a month plus. If you have got less than that, then I would potentially suggest doing specific campaigns around peak time periods. So for example, if you are a jewelry brand and you don't have much money, then concentrate that spend around Valentine's Day when you know lots of people are going to be buying, and that budget will go a bit further for you. But if you can and you want to be advertising daily, then really £1,000 a month is the minimum that I would recommend, just to allow you to do some testing and have a decent amount of chance of getting in front of people.
Yeah, I don't know if other people are thinking the same, but the budget you mentioned, obviously maybe because the client I'm dealing with is not in e-commerce, they're not selling products, but still the budget that you've mentioned is way too high than what the budgets I've been seeing with some clients.
Yeah, so then I would start more sporadic with and advertise around those kind of peak periods. So maybe when you're doing a sale, or like I said, around Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, even Christmas, when you know you're going to get a high volume of buyers that are all buying at one time. And I do that for a client. I run ads for a client that sells greetings cards, and it's a really low average order value because often people are just spending £4 on a card. So it's really hard for us to have success throughout the year. But when we advertise around those, we get huge success because everyone is buying a card for that one particular occasion. So that works really, really well. So it can work for certain clients that more switch on, switch off if they haven't got huge budgets for other periods of time. I don't recommend it necessarily. I recommend trying to have a daily budget. For service businesses and like coaching and things like that, budgeting is going to be a bit different. That's not my particular area of expertise. So it might be slightly sort of different in terms of benchmarking, but I would still say you need £10 per audience per day to have success.
Okay, we'll take one last question also from Diana. In what type of campaign do you notice that you're reaching higher CPCs? For example, I'm running a brand awareness campaign right now for a children's museum, and it's optimizing for ad recall with trade. The rates are high with great, but the CPC.
Yeah, so I mean, again, this is a little bit outside my expertise, but I probably wouldn't run a brand awareness campaign like this for really big brands that have got huge budgets. So for example, if I was Coca-Cola and I was running a brand awareness campaign, then that would be what I would choose. But for that sort of campaign, I would be running an engagement campaign, potentially a traffic campaign if you're trying to get them over to a specific blog post or landing page. If you're just trying to create awareness, I would be using an engagement campaign. I wouldn't be using brand awareness, and you might then find that your cost per clicks are better.
Okay, interesting. Cool. Thank you so much, Carly. I think it's fair to say that lots of us will be rewatching this, especially when you were talking about the ads manager pixels, and I'm like, okay, we need to go through this in detail.
I will send you the blog post because I break it all down in that and talk about iOS 14 and what steps you need to take. So I'll send you the presentation and the blog post, and you can post those in the group so that people can look at them. And if you've got any further questions, if you connect with me on Instagram and just pop me a DM, I'm happy to answer any specific questions there too.
Thank you so much, Carly. We really appreciate it, and we really appreciate your time and putting this together. And hopefully we'll have you soon once we know more about the updates. You said they're coming in July about Facebook, as always. So we'll talk about that. But thank you everyone who joined us today. We are having a thank you from Diana for answering her questions. You're welcome, Diana. And so please connect with Carly on her Instagram. And if you have any questions, also check her website where she has her blog if you want to go through the steps of Ads Manager. And we will see you again in new training. I'm going to end this broadcast now and wishing you a very good day. Bye.
Bye.